I don't know about you, but there are certain positions in chess games that I really struggle with, especially when the plan isn't clear. Like I can't like look at the position and immediately see what I should do, especially when the best move is maybe like a really quiet, improving position, just making my position a little bit better, maybe making one of my weaknesses a little less weak, or trying to put some pressure on a weakness on the other side. Those sorts of subtle positions I really struggle with. And I played a game recently which demonstrates and emphasizes this. And so I wanted to show it to you today. Hopefully you can learn something from my mistakes and we can kind of learn together how to handle these sorts of positions. So let's dive in. This is a game from Chess Club that I played this week against my friend Calvin, and I actually featured a game, my previous game with Calvin, in a previous video. You should be able to see a link to that in the description or up here somewhere. Maybe you can click on it. And my previous game with Calvin, I actually like blundered a full piece like very early, like in the opening, and so I felt like I needed a rematch with him. So we played again. I played with the white pieces, and I knew that he typically plays the Sicilian, so I wanted to play the closed and play the Grand Prix attack, which is what I typically play against the Sicilian these days. And so we went through the opening. It was a little bit weird. Like he obviously knows some nice things against the Grand Prix, because by playing a6, I can't bring my bishop out to b5, which I generally like to do once that knight comes here and then maybe trade it off. I played a4 because I didn't want to make it easy for him to just expand on the queen side here. So we played on. I like to develop the bishop to c4 if I can't go to b5, and then d3, bishop e7, castles. And yeah, he didn't castle right away, but he started pushing in the center. And I did, like back here, I saw that this was a possibility. And this is something I find a little bit challenging when black kind of pushes into the center this early. But I figured, especially with a4, I always have b3 and even a2 for my bishop to move back to. So I wasn't too concerned. It would make this bishop kind of pretty weak. It would have been nicer if I could trade it off for this knight instead. But anyway, it is what it is. C'est la vie. So after this push, I actually took, which the engine doesn't like. The engine prefers if I just move back here, and then pushing here doesn't really work because I think I can just take here. And actually there's this funny line where bishop comes here with a check, I move out of the way, and then this pawn gets pushed, but it's still pretty much equal. Black has gotten equality, but black isn't necessarily better. However, instead I captured here and then move the bishop back, which the engine doesn't love, but it particularly doesn't like this move either. So this, attacks the knight, which feels good in the moment, but it opens up my bishop again. So now my bishop is actually feeling really good. So kind of not a perfect opening by either of us, but the game goes on. Castles, bishop d2. This is where I was kind of starting actually to not really know what the plan was, but I felt like at least developing my bishop, it's still not very active and it can't really move out here anywhere, but it gets me closer to connecting my rooks, which is nice. Increases the scope a little bit as well. The queen comes down here. This is one kind of issue with this position, is my f pawn for a while felt kind of weak, and I typically in the Grand Prix, I like to have a pawn here on e4, right? And then potentially an f5 break can come later, especially when this bishop is actually fianchettoed. But none of that happened. We were just kind of playing on in this position. So I went ahead and made that trade. And I think, yeah, what I was kind of thinking is a typical attack, or a typical idea for the Grand Prix, is to bring the queen around like this and attack with the knight. And I was thinking, without that knight there, then I can potentially start to put a bit of pressure on this h-pawn. It can also pretty easily be defended probably, but that's kind of my overall plan that I was going for. So I moved the queen to e1, very typical for the Grand Prix. And now this is the position. This is the position that I kind of want to stop and take a second to talk about. Because, I have this kind of idea of bringing the queen out here. Obviously, I can't actually bring the queen to h4, like I mentioned earlier, because the bishop is stopping that. But I can potentially bring it here, and then maybe try to find some way to get my bishop up to h6. Like before the bishop, the light squared bishop, black's light squared bishop was here, I could have potentially pushed f5 and then put my bishop there if the queen was here. So there are some of those ideas. But now, with this bishop here, I became not very sure what to do. So black's rooks are connected, which is nice for black. And one thing I kind of missed, I think, I probably saw it, but I didn't see kind of the importance of it, is that black can actually bring a rook to the e file with a tempo on my queen. And it turned out, like, in retrospect, that control of this e file ended up being crucial for this game, and you'll see that in a couple of minutes. But what the move I ended up making was knight h4. And this is an inaccuracy, and I'll show you why. Well, I'll show you why first, and then I'll show you what would have been better. Because, as I said, black can get the e file with a tempo, and then after I move my queen, black can then move the bishop back to e6. And now this bishop is challenging my bishop, and if I just allow this bishop to take, then I have to take with my c pawn, and now I have doubled pawns over here on the b file and an isolated pawn on the d file, and I don't like how that's messing up my pawn structure. So I figured I had to take, but then after black recaptures, now black is ready to double up the rooks, and that's exactly what happened. So we get to this position, and black has really good control of the e file, which is a huge positional advantage that black maintained for pretty much the whole game, the whole middle game anyway. And now my knight is just misplaced. Like, I had moved it here to kind of attack this bishop, and that just kind of ended up really not going anywhere, right? That was a pretty useless move, and so I end up just moving my knight back. And I'm gonna go back to that position in just a second, but I just want to say that this is kind of where the momentum of the game kind of started moving in the wrong direction for me. This is where, like, I was okay here, and I don't know, the engine says that it's like minus 0.1 or 0.2 or 0.3. Like, it's pretty much equal in this position, but black was able to get much more of an initiative, and I started having to play defense, and things kind of didn't go well from there. So let's move back a bit, because I find this position very interesting in my own chess. It's like, what is the move here? You know, like, what is, and even like, aside from just what is the move, what is the plan here? Like, what should white do to make progress or to improve the position or whatever? Like, I decided to attack the bishop. That was clearly not the right plan. So I actually want you to just pause and take a second here. This isn't like a tactics kind of puzzle or whatever. It's more of a positional thing. Pause and take a second and leave a comment below if you have sort of an idea of what the right move in this position is and what kind of plan you would shoot for in this position. Once you've taken a second to do that, I'll show you a couple of things. I did quite a bit of analysis in this position, and interestingly, I actually used some AI assistants to try to figure out what the plan is in this position, like ChatGPT, that sort of thing. And it's amazing how much better those sorts of AI tools are getting at chess. Now, it still gave me a whole lot of absolute nonsense, but there were a few nuggets of good ideas in there as well. And I'm actually going to shoot another video a little bit later to kind of show you what process I went through to use AI to analyze this position. You might be surprised at how it worked. But anyway, that's a topic for another time. There are a couple of moves that make a lot of sense in this position. The first one that I want to show you is Queen F2. Queen F2 accomplishes a couple of things. First of all, it gets the queen off of the e file so that there isn't this rook A to e8 with a tempo on the queen, which is nice. Like, as soon as the rook comes here, I can potentially just contest for the file by bringing my rook right away. I don't have to spend a move moving the queen. Also, this pawn is a very powerful pawn in black's position, because the pawn is on my half of the board, it's controlling some squares, and it's protected. And so the queen, as kind of a long-term positional thing, the queen is actually eyeing that pawn. Now, this pawn is very well protected. I'm not threatening it in any way, but I'm just adding a bit of pressure. I have a queen looking at it. I have a knight looking at it. You know, in the future, maybe there are c3 ideas to try to kind of undermine that pawn's position. So recognizing the positional aspects of this, where black can get this file with a tempo on the queen, and black has this strong pawn that I can sort of start putting pressure on. Those were a couple of key things, I think, in my analysis of this position that I needed to see during the game and help me with my decision of what to do. But Queen F2 isn't actually the top engine move. The top engine move is Knight G5. And I feel like during the game, I looked at Knight G5 and I discounted it pretty quickly because I felt like, well, black can either just kick it right away, and then where does the knight go? Or black can just capture it, and then my pawn structure is damaged. But actually, both of those things are just fine. If black does capture, my pawn structure is a little bit damaged, but I actually get the f-file, and I actually win a tempo on the bishop, actually. And not only that, but black has traded a bishop for a knight. So I have the bishop pair now, and the f-file, and this pawn is fairly advanced and can potentially be used for an attack. So actually, this position is just fine. And then if instead black would play h6 and kick this knight, I can actually put it on e4. And again, I was looking at e4, but I was thinking like, well, can't the bishop just capture? And yes, the bishop can just capture, but then if I capture with my d-pawn, now these pawns are actually kind of strong. Like this f-pawn was always kind of awkward, but with this connected e-pawn, actually it's kind of nice. Like either one of these pawns could actually push at some point and maybe cause some trouble. This is not a passed pawn because I still have my c-pawn that can stop it if it moves forward. And this is a perfectly fine position for white. And so that was actually the key move here. But Queen f2 was also a pretty good one. And so anyway, it was just interesting to analyze, and like I say, to analyze with AI, which actually helped me to understand which of these lines I should look a little bit closer at. So if you're interested in that video, definitely hit that subscribe button so you'll see when it comes out. But yeah, this is the kind of position that I definitely struggle with. And we'll come back and give a couple of sort of closing thoughts on this as well a little bit later. But anyway, we went through this line, as I showed already, and black got doubled up here. So I bring the knight back just to position it a little bit better. And now black starts attacking weaknesses. So this pawn is a weakness, and I couldn't push it. Could I have pushed it? Takes. Yeah, I probably could have pushed it. Maybe that would have been best. What does the engine say? The engine doesn't like it because, oh, the engine really doesn't like it. Oh, because it hangs this pawn. There you go. So I couldn't push it. And I decided the only thing I could really do was just take the knight. This, unfortunately, gives up a bishop for a knight, which isn't great. So now I have a knight versus a bishop kind of going into an endgame later. I still haven't solved the problem of the pressure on this pawn, but at least it has damaged black's pawn structure. So I'm thinking, you know, especially with this isolated pawn, maybe I can start kind of honing in on this as a weakness, and in an endgame, you know, I might be better because of this this isolated pawn, even though it's fairly strong, and this one is also kind of causing some problems. But then I played rook e to c1. Yes, rook e to c1, because I felt like I had to defend this pawn. There's an interesting engine line here. What was it? Oh, no, this isn't the spot that had a good engine line. Like, it does. I mean, the engine likes f5, which just seems weird, like trading the queens and kind of messing up this pawn structure. But I guess it does, you know, get rid of the attack on this, and the engine thinks that everything is still fine. But instead, I played defensively, and I was playing defensively for kind of the rest of the game. And this d-pawn, I mentioned that the d-pawn was very strong for black's position. It means that this e3 square is really weak, and it remained really weak through the rest of the game. And actually, part of the reason I lost was because of the weakness of this e3 square, as we'll see in a bit. So now my knight is pinned. I decided to just move my queen out of the pin so I could do something with the knight. I considered at this point trying to reroute my knight and block the e-file so that these rooks weren't so coordinated. And now there's more pressure on this c-pawn. I had calculated this, that I could just bring my rook. The engine doesn't like it, but it worked in practice. And black didn't trade right away. Black actually, so yeah, I should also say rerouting this knight here would also put pressure on this bishop, and this pawn is pinned. So black just kind of, you know, removed any of those possibilities by pushing g6. I move the knight anyway, and of course the knight is being defended by the rook. Takes, and the bishop goes back into this sort of fianchetto kind of position, still maintaining defense of this d-pawn, and the game moves on. Now, I moved my queen back to f3, and that was a waste because, again, this e3 square is so weak, the rook just comes and kicks it, and I put the queen back here anyway. And I was looking at potential h5, and, this pawn is potentially weak. I need to keep defending it with the queen, and there's all kinds of problems. But I'm thinking if I can push g3 at some point, and then maybe my queen even has to come back to d1, this is still probably okay. I can still, hold on to the defense here. But I'm definitely very much playing in a defensive kind of way. So e7, probably looking to bring the rook here at some point, especially if this queen is kicked. I thought that this knight move was pretty nice. I was still feeling like I could defend it. I kind of reduce the weakness, I suppose, a little bit of this e3 square by bringing the knight. Black attacks my queen. I move it back to d1. And then the rook just moves back. Because the rook can't actually move here, I just take it with the queen, right? So the rook actually had to retreat. So I felt like this was nice. And now, again, I'm like, okay, can I get rid of sort of this big problem of the e-file by putting my knight over here? Bishop moves to h6, which was attacking this, so I push here. And now black is trying to kind of undermine things over on this side of the board. And yeah, I put the knight back here. Right. One of the problems with putting the knight on e4, which probably in some of those key positions earlier, I didn't really quite see it. There was definitely a point where my queen was over here and I was wanting to put my knight here and it would have just fallen into this fork, right? If the rook wasn't defending this pawn, then the queen could take and all that sort of stuff, but it just doesn't really work. So instead of putting the knight here, I put the knight back on f3. So this knight is just kind of dancing around all over the place. But this does attack this pawn, and it looks like it attacks this pawn. I think when I put the knight here, I thought that it also attacked this pawn. It really doesn't, because so black just pushed h3, and if I were to take here, then this knight just gets pinned, and I can defend it, but then there's extra pressure on it, and things are not going well for me. So instead of that, I moved the queen to f1, which is attacking this h-pawn right away. And then another key position. So this is more of a tactical position, but I made a tactical mistake here. Black pushes g5, and now the question is, what do I do next? So black is threatening to kind of try to open things up and maybe, bring the rook and the queen, and, obviously there's my knight, but try to like get in on this side of the board or just break up the defense around my king. Also, it looks like I can take this pawn, and after taking back with the bishop, I can also take with the knight here, or take with the knight first, either way. But then that runs into a skewer when my knight and bishop are gone. So there's all kinds of crazy tactics here. And what I ended up doing is I captured here. And the reason this was a problem is because after this, there is actually bishop e3. I mentioned that this weak e3 square was going to be a problem all game, and this was basically the death blow to my position. Now, my king can only move over here, or I could probably what I should have done is actually gone down the exchange and traded this rook. But then, there's a passed pawn with all this defense behind it, and things are just looking really bad. So what are my options here? I can't take with the queen here because the queen is defending this key e2 square, right? So things are going very poorly if I do that. The right move in this position was actually rook e1. And rook e1 helps to reduce the weakness of e3 so that the rook can't necessarily come down here. I still can't allow the bishop to come down here, but then if this happens, then what? I can just take with the queen and things are fine. If this happens, now I can take over here because the bishop is hanging. And the reason the bishop is hanging is because this rook is pinned. If I take here, then we both lose our queens and I am just up a bishop. So kind of an interesting position. I did not find rook e1, but it's kind of an instructional sort of move. It strengthens this square, which is kind of the key in this position. And that's something that I just didn't see. So although it's tactical, it's also kind of positional here. Understanding the importance of this key positional square within, on my side of the board was pretty key to finding the right move. Instead, I basically couldn't figure it out, so I just figured, okay, I'm just going to take the pawn and figure it out from there. But then as I showed, the bishop came in here, and the game didn't last much longer. So the rook came over here, I guess just defending, but mostly making a space for the queen to come down here, which the queen did, and I totally missed that the queen was aiming for a2. So after the game, I was thinking maybe b3 would have been the right move here, but actually there's a fascinating tactical move here that not only like saves the game, but actually means that white is winning. I completely missed it. Leave a comment below if you can find it. It's a very cool one. But anyway, the game continued like this. I was not wanting there to be some kind of pin on my knight. So I moved the queen here thinking that that would allow me to, you know, move the knight somewhere. But then queen a2 was just game over. I did make one move. I thought that maybe this would work to give my king an escape square, but it doesn't work. It totally doesn't work. And so I resigned in this position. And so, yeah, but totally, like, this e3 square, like, first of all, with all of black's pressure on the e file, and then just the weakness of this square and getting the bishop there, is really what totally lost the game for me. And that all goes back to this position, right? Where I played this incorrect plan to just do like a one-move threat on this bishop. And because of this sequence, it allowed black to really grab this file and didn't do anything about the potential, like about the strength of this pawn. And so pretty interesting. I feel like this is totally, like I said, the sort of position that I'm kind of not very good at. Like if it's a tactical position and there's some deep tactical line that I need to calculate, like I'm not amazing at it, but I feel like I'm better at it. I kind of know, I can kind of focus in on what I need to calculate. Whereas in a position like this, where it's like, I don't know what the plan is. Like, I don't know if there's a tactic I should go for. I don't know if there's just like some quiet positional move that I should go for. And yeah, I feel like that's something that I kind of need to learn, right? This is actually part of the reason why I decided to learn the Catalan opening, which I have a video about that you can go watch. I'll link to it down below. But the Catalan is a bit more positional, and so I'm kind of hoping that playing more games with that opening, which I obviously didn't in this case, like I started with e4, I'm just going to go back to my roots sort of thing. But playing something like the Catalan, which is more positional, I'm hoping is going to help me to find these sorts of positions where I need to just make positional improvements. Instead of thinking about tactics and calculating lines, I need to think about how can I improve my worst piece, or how can I put pressure on my opponent's weakness, or those sorts of things, right? So this I think was kind of the key position. The engine doesn't think so, but for me, I think it was. And then, of course, the key mistake I made was down here on move, where was it? Move 34. Actually, something that's really interesting about this position as well is I took a look. What I was thinking here is black's pawn structure is worse, right? And so if I can defend this and trade down into an endgame, I think I'm better. And it turns out I'm right. When I leave the position the same, but remove all of the pieces from the board and just go down to only pawns, I'm totally better. Like, it's plus 4.8 for white. And so I was right about that. So one plan here potentially is to try to trade things down. And I guess I thought that by taking here, maybe I could manage to trade that somehow if I can figure out a way to like get my king out of the way and that sort of thing. So interesting idea, but it didn't end up working out. And there were a lot of things going on here. But like I said, I really needed to understand the strength and the importance, I guess not the strength, the weakness really. The weakness for me, the strength for black, of this square, of the e3 square, and understanding that, you know, allowing the position to get to that square, allowing the bishop rather to get to that square would be just a really big problem for me. And it turns out it was. But hey, I think this is, you know, what the journey is all about. You know, we try things, we make mistakes, and then hopefully we learn from them, and then kind of put these patterns in the back of our head so that, you know, in later games when something similar comes up, we can sort of recognize and maybe remember that this is something that we had learned before. So I hope that this was useful for you. I hope that seeing some of my mistakes over the board is helpful for you. That's really the whole point of why I'm doing this. And so if you enjoyed this and if you learned something, definitely hit that like button, and I will see you on the next video.